Welcome to The Inside View. I'm Ralph Renzuli, your host. Thank you for watching. My guests today are Peggy Romano and Louis Baum, and they're here to talk about Holy Family Parish and the iconic historical stained glass windows. Guys, thanks for coming in. I appreciate this.
Okay, thank you for having us.
Oh, you're very welcome. So I'd like to start off with this, and this is right in your wheelhouse, Louis. Let's start off with a brief history of the construction of the church, when it was built, the material used, and I know there were several iterations of constructions.
Yeah, well, okay, just quickly, the first church was in 1847. That burned down in 1866. A second church was built up on Peachtree Street across from the entrance to the high school, Benton Hall. And that 2 years later was condemned, and they had to build a new church. So basically the parish was penniless, but they dug down deep, and I'm sure that the priests twisted the arms of the parishioners, especially the rich parishioners. And in 1874, the cornerstone was laid for the current St. Mary's Church. And over the period of 1874 to 1879, the church was constructed and opened on Christmas Eve of 1879. The church is all built out of native stone with native artisans, woodworkers of the native people that carved out the stones. They even dragged down a huge stone from Moreland Park that is still the current stepping stone to get into the church, through the main door.
So whereabouts in Moreland Park? Do you have a location? No idea?
No location, other than a lot of the quarries were up in that area off of Loomis Street and around the city. But I know the stone from the front steps came from Moreland Park.
Is this slate stone? What
no, it's a massive stone, probably 8 inches thick.
Oh, I thought it was slate. So
no. It might be slate, but that's where it came from.
Okay. Interesting.
Now, what else would you like to know about the construction of the church?
The stained glass windows that are there now, what were the windows that were in the original church?
Well,
the stained glass was put in later.
Well, the whole series of stained glass windows in general. There's very nondescript in what the church, the original windows were. However, the two windows behind the main altar, the Blessed Heart of Jesus and the Blessed Heart of Mary, they were put in there in 1895 by probably the richest parishioner, Dennis Collins, who had a grocery store on Main Street in Little Falls. He became rich. He owned a lot of the properties in Little Falls, and he was by far the main benefactor of the church. The main altar, the two side altars, the altar that's being used today. He bought some of the Stations of the Cross. So he was by far the main benefactor.
Okay.
Now, the church was built in the Gothic style. And the Gothic style is basically, you can picture it as having arched windows, other windows that go to an arch, a point at the top, and they basically signifies pointing towards heaven. But more importantly, the thing in the Gothic church is this flying buttresses. Now, if you look closely at the outside of a church, you're going to see there's, I think they're maybe 20 feet high and maybe 20 feet out from the building. And that basically supports the structure of the building. Where heretofore, you had to reinforce it on the inside of the building. But once they put flying buttresses on the outside of the building, this opened up the space for walls and for windows. And so it was that in mind when the church was built, that they had along the sides of the church a series on each side of 4 series of 2 windows each. And then the large windows in the other front part of the church, and then the windows behind the main altar.
Okay. Now, you mentioned there were local artisans that did this. I would assume I shouldn't assume anything, but mostly Irish, German?
Mostly Irish.
Mostly Irish, okay.
Mostly Irish, yeah. They were very good. They built Dale and Associates. They did all construction all over Little Falls. Now, one other thing is that the original church was built so that it went as high as the current bell tower. And it wasn't until 1901 that local artisans, again, put up scaffolding. If you think now scaffolding all the way from the street to the top of the cross. And that picture is kind of eerie. I don't know who would want to go up there, but they did. So they finished off their church in 1901 by going from the belfry to the top of the church, 185 feet with a gilded gold cross. And the church was so magnificent, it seated around 1,200 people, that it was called the Cathedral of the West. And because it was by far the largest church going west of Albany. Now, the church itself is older than the Albany, the parish, I should say, itself is older than the Albany diocese by 8 years. And when the church was built, basically it was in the diocese of New York City, Diocese of New York.
Sometimes the sun hits that cross just the right way. It's absolutely stunning. Yeah.
That's one thing is that the way the sun is, the sun shines into the windows on the right side of the church, and those are dazzling. Not so much on the Main Street side.
Right. Any idea how much it cost to build the church?
I've seen some estimates. I can't remember exactly what they were.
Okay. How about the stained glass windows? What did they cost?
I've never seen prices for the original stained glass windows. I know what the prices were to have the stained glass windows removed and renovated years later in 1990. But the thing is that when they decided that they were going to build the church in all the grandeur it is now, and the kids gave pennies, the poor people couldn't afford to put much money into it. So a lot of the early Irish people and maybe some of the other Catholic minorities like the Slovenians, the Slovaks, not the Slovaks, Slovenians, the Poles, they basically after work actually dug the foundation and the cellar for the church. Mm-hmm. So that's their contribution.
So the stained glass windows were made by a guy in England. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Is that Dennis Collins, who was one of the main benefactors of the church, I guess he had convinced the pastor, and they decided to go first class all the way. So there were a lot of people that were involved in stained glass manufacture. How do you distinguish the ordinary guy from the premier guy? So the thing is, you got to take a look at the secrets that they had for developing stained glass with various hues of colors. Not just a blue, but 10 shades of blue, different shades of blue on the same cloak or something like that. So they went to John Hardman and Company in Birmingham, England. This company started the revival of stained glass back in the 1850s, and they basically were the premier people. They had not only great alchemy for making stained glass very, very beautiful, but they also had the artisans that could paint it. So if you go and take a look at the stained glass windows in the church, you can see the painting of the faces, the old people, really phenomenal. And as one example, that in the first miracle of Christ was at Cana. And when the story goes, when they ran out of wine, Blessed Mary asked Jesus to do something to get more wine. And so he performed his first miracle, basically in changing the water into wine. But if you look at the window, it's not just the guy pouring something into a vessel. You'll see it going from white, various shades of red, to deep red, a wine color. Mm-hmm. So basically, that's the type of thing that they were looking for. So they commissioned, John Hardman Company has many windows in the Houses of Parliament. They have windows in cathedrals and churches in Australia, throughout the United States. In fact, there are windows in the cathedral in Albany that are made by John Hardman and Company.
But we are so fortunate.
We are fortunate, more than fortunate.
So how thick are they? Any idea?
I'd say, I'm not, I'm an engineer, so I don't like to guess. They're probably a fraction of an inch, a quarter of an inch, or something less than that. But the thing is, when you think about it now, the windows are made of individual pieces that are all pieced together with lead. And the lead is formed around the lead being very soft and pliable, so the windows are made, and then they're put into a frame and they're held up. But that window has to hold its own weight. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the problems that the windows have had down through the years. Lead being a very strong material, it tends to creep. That means that it increases in dimension, and it'll go from a fraction of an inch to a bigger fraction of an inch. So that you had to have people that really knew what they were doing.
Must have been a hard job to get those things up there back in the early 1900s when they didn't have the equipment we have now.
No, but just think of putting up the steeple.
Oh my God!
The thing, how they I don't know how they did it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to tell you, obviously, I'm a parishioner at Holy Family Parish, and there are plenty of Sunday mornings when I sit there, and I'm obviously listening to Father Slezak, but every once in a while I have to remind myself to look up, because especially if the sun's coming in the right way, they're just stunning. They're absolutely beautiful. Yeah. But I still never took the time to look at each one individually. So when I found out that we were going to be doing this podcast, I went to church in the morning, and I went to each one of them and read the inscriptions, and because this obviously depicts events in the life of Jesus Christ, which is significant in and of itself. So I looked at every one, and I didn't have enough time, because I could have just stood there for like at least an hour looking at all the detail. They're absolutely stunning.
Yeah, what you're talking about started my about 8-year trek. As I indicated in the dedication, I'd go to church, I'd do the same thing you did. And there are many thousands of people, I'm sure, in Little Falls, the parishioners of St. Mary's, have gone down those aisles and never looked at the windows. Just like
absolutely.
Okay.
Well, it's almost like we take it for granted. Yeah, so I hate to say that, but it's kind of true.
It is. So the thing is I went to church and was, dull sermon, basically looking around and all of a sudden picking up things. And so I went back to Terry, and I kept on telling her, I said, these windows are so beautiful, so many stories. And she said, if you like them, write about it. Okay, so started out on an 8-year trek. A lot of research work into how stained glass is made, the history of stained glass, history of the church. So I put it all into the book. And then going into the windows themselves is that I like to write. I can't do very much in layout. I can't do very much in some of the other things that go into publication. Mm-hmm. So basically, I was lucky enough when I did the book to come across Jean Ronan, who was a photographer extraordinaire, maybe not as good as Dave Warner, but she was pretty good. And also she did the layout of the book. So, but the thing is now also I'm not a theologian. So basically what I come down with looking at each window, and I spent a lot of time with the Catholic Encyclopedia, believe me, of going through the history, what their window was trying to say, and the companion biblical section. But the thing is, not being an expert, I conferred with Father Tom Vale, who had been a priest for 68 years, and Father Tom from Little Falls basically taught in the seminary, so he knew what he was talking about. And then also with my childhood friend, Bob Rosen, who we were born the same day here in Little Falls and went to school together, but he pulled out in 7th grade to go to a seminary. And he basically later became a Franciscan priest, a Franciscan friar, and he just passed away in July, but he has PhD in canon law at the Catholic University. So between Father Vale and Father Rosen, they basically reviewed what I had written to make sure I didn't err majorly, stuff like that.
Getting back to the windows, obviously they're probably irreplaceable. I don't know if we could.
They are.
Is there anything being done for preservation to make sure that they're going to?
Well, the thing is that one of the things they do is on the outside of the windows there's a protective plexiglass or something like that on the street side. So if a kid throws a rock, it's going to hit that, not hit the window. back in 1990, 92, in that time frame when Father Celeste was here, the thing is there are gaps that opened in the windows. Like I said, the lead had crept, so there were a lot of openings and stuff like that. So they engaged in Cahoe's, a company in Cahoe's Design in Cahoe's, New York. And they very methodically took the windows out, transported them to Cahoe's. They redid the whole thing. They replaced the broken pieces of glass and recreated it, put them all back in. And in their statement that I've read, that they said that when they put them back in the early 1990s, they were good for 100 years.
Wow.
But I see that they've had cherry pickers out there, and I'm told that the cherry pickers are basically caulking around the windows to make sure that there's not inclement weather getting inside.
Okay.
I think that might be part of the capital campaign money. So they're actually working on the outside of the windows, and also they're going to be working on the plaster around the windows on the interior.
Okay.
Because some of them are very difficult to open and close, and I think that they're working on that so that, it's just functions in a better way.
Yeah, there's so much to do to maintain the
There
church.
is.
It's incredible.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
I use the word priceless. I don't think you can put a price. I don't think all the churches in this whole area could together afford to buy windows of that stature.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get to Peggy and the tour, but before we do, the book. Is the book for sale? Can people, if somebody wanted to read your book, where would they?
If the book, the parish office has the books.
Okay.
They're selling for $25, and the Historical Society also has books for $25.
Terrific. Okay, great.
I think we've sold, a couple of hundred or something like that, a few hundred.
Yep, I think that we have. Yep.
So one of the other reasons why we wanted to talk today was to talk about the tour that you've organized.
Right. So let me give you a little background to this. So having gone to church there for over 70 years, I, like everyone else, has looked at those windows and the colors, and I've seen the colors on the walls, but I never actually looked at them. So it was after Louie's book that I took some time, and like you, Ralph, I went from window to window, discovered that there was so much symbolism in these windows. So right about at the same time, I talked to Father Slezak, and I said, we really need to get some information on, all of the symbolism in the windows. So it was then that Martin Babinek said, I have an idea. I think we ought to showcase these windows so that people get to experience them. So Up Mobility was very good. We wrote a grant. They gave us funds toward the project. So I probably spent around 14 months writing about each window. And so now what we have is we've developed a tour. We have a professional voice that's doing the tour. We have a companion book that goes along with the tour so that if you want to download a QR code, you can listen to it on your phone. If you don't want to download a QR code, you have this little companion book so that you can go from window to window, or maybe you want to choose a window and say, I want to know more about this window. So we have that. We also have what we've called a meditation book. So not only does it talk about what symbolism is in the window, but it talks about theologically some of the background of the story of each window. So if you look at the windows on one side represent the childhood of Jesus, and the other side represent his public ministry. So, for instance, on the side where as a young child, we talk about the nativity, the Annunciation. On the other side would be baptism, wedding, feast of Cana, etc. So the tour is all about enabling people to do a self-guided tour with this book or the QR code for the audio tour, as well as pick up the meditation book if they'd like to spend more time with each window.
So you started this process in 2023?
Probably 22.
2022.
Yeah, yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about the process. Did you wrote this by yourself, or did you
Yes.
have help? You did.
Well, I wrote for each window. I would write the script, and then of course went to Father to make sure it was theologically correct. And so he and I, he would look at it and tell me, do this or do that. But really, the story of each window is reflected in the gospel. So, if you talk about the nativity, the story of the nativity, but you look at things like under the manger, it's not hay, it's wheat. And so the symbolism of that is the Eucharist itself is wheat. And, Jesus is in a manger, which was actually a feeding trough. So it would be appropriate to say that, the feeding trough fed the animals, but Jesus is feeding us. So it's a tremendous amount of symbolism and reflection back to the gospel. And it's just amazing what you can see when you look at each and every window.
So obviously, you don't have to be Catholic to enjoy this and learn from this.
Right.
So it's not just the beauty of the windows, it's also educating yourself about the life of Christ.
Right. And one of the things I notice is when you look at the windows, you look at the fine features like, Mary always has her features are very fine, her fingers are very fine. The expression on the faces in several windows, like when Jesus teaching in the temple, but he was actually lost. He left their entourage. They had come to Jerusalem for Passover, and they were looking for him. So Mary and Joseph are up in the corner, and you can see the look on their face that they're very concerned about where is he? He's lost, and we need to find him. So even the looks on their faces, I know we have, through the grant, we have a project manager. His name is Will Sachs, and Will is not Catholic, but he and I also went through each window. And the very first window is of the Immaculate Conception, and so it kind of demonstrates that, she is all-powerful. Under her feet is a snake with an apple in its mouth, so she has, she is all-powerful over the devil and that whole story with the Garden of Eden. So Will says to me, look at her feet. And I said, he said, her feet look very substantial, like she is standing, the snake is under her feet. So he's like, it's almost like they were saying they made her feet substantial to indicate her power. And Mary and all the other windows, the fine features, you wouldn't expect that. But he was right. When you look at her feet, they're very substantial.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's an interesting detail to point out.
I think that this goes back to what I said before of the remarkable ability of John Hardman and Sons. You've got to look at the faces of the prodigal son. That's the same thing. The look on the kid, the young man's son who's trying to come back into the thing. It's unbelievable. So it's those details that John Hardman did as opposed to the ordinary stained glass. You'll go a lot of places, you'll see ordinary stained glass windows. But here you're going to see exactly what Peggy said and many of the other things. Take a look at the crucifixion window, for example. You can see all the muscles.
The anatomy.
Yeah.
The
anatomy in Christ's body.
Yeah, right, incredible.
You don't find that in the run-of-the-mill.
And in that same window, if you look at the face of Mary, you'll see a tear on her face.
That's right.
This is in stained glass.
I didn't notice that.
Yes, there is.
So that's why you really have to focus and look at it. And
Yes.
Did somebody, you may not be able to answer this, did somebody locally actually tell Hardman what they wanted?
Not aware.
Yeah, too long ago.
Yeah, one thing I can point out, though, and maybe Peggy will agree with me, I'm not sure how they ever determined where the windows were going to be put. Of course, one side is the childhood of Christ, others is public ministry, but they were in haphazard order. If I had been around at the time, I would have gone from the front of the church, from the entrance of the church, going into the church in chronological order.
That would make sense.
That would have made sense to me, you know. But that's not the way it is. And when they put them back in 1990, they put them back in the same order they took them out, except for one window. They got mixed up.
Yeah. And there are 22, correct?
22 windows. And if you look at the sanctuary where the altar is, way up to the left of the altar on the high wall, way up toward the ceiling, one is a window of Melchizedek, and one is Abraham and Isaac.
Yep.
So Melchizedek is offering bread and wine, and you see Abraham, you know, he just came back from battle. He's got a helmet on. But the other window is the sacrifice of Abraham's son, Isaac. So he was told to sacrifice his only son, and then the angel appeared to him and said, you know, don't sacrifice your son, and he sacrificed the ram that was in the thicket. So that whole story. So I'm standing there thinking, why are these two windows in this particular spot? Why do we have Melchizedek and Abraham in this spot? And then at Mass the next weekend, I heard Father say, our sacrifice of, just as Abraham and Melchizedek made their sacrifice, we hope that our sacrifice is as acceptable to God as theirs was. So that's why these windows are there, because they're in the sanctuary where Mass is said.
Very, very interesting.
It is. It's very interesting.
So you have an audio tour that's actually taking place this Sunday.
Yes.
How are you doing on attendance?
We have 115 people coming.
That's more than what you told me a few days ago.
Yep, we have 115 people coming.
That's a really good response.
It is a great response.
Can you, for people who may be listening, I realize it's late, it's Thursday, and this is Sunday, but do you have more room?
Sure. I mean, the church seats, how many, Louis?
It used to seat 1,200, probably 1,000 now.
Right.
Yeah. So, we hopefully have enough books for everybody. People might have to share. We ordered more books. Hopefully they're here, the tour companion book. And so if people want to come, they can call the phone number. It's 315-717-3012. And they can, that's actually my number, so now it's really out there. And
it's free.
And it's free.
And there's refreshments.
There's refreshments, yes. And we have a violinist who's going to play some background music.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's going to be
very nice because Amanda Straney is Terry's daughter.
Oh, okay.
Makes it good.
How appropriate is that?
How appropriate.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
So your companion book is available at the church, but it's also available later on through Amazon, correct?
Right. That will be available through Amazon, but we're going to have them in the parish office as well. So it's a little bit more reasonable to buy them from the parish office. So we'll have Louis' book, we'll have the companion book, and we'll have the meditation book.
That's all. This is absolutely tremendous that you're both honoring the church in this way.
Well, I wouldn't have come to this point if it wasn't for Louis. I mean, the fact that he did this book initially is what made me really start to think about, what do these windows mean? And not only for people who are Catholic, but for someone to look at the magnificent colors or to know the story a little bit and to understand the symbolism. So Louis kind of spurred us all on a little bit.
I've got another project that I'd like to see done someday. I think it would be beautiful if they could light the windows from the inside, so in the evening you could see it outside.
Absolutely.
So you'd have to have a professional person, a lighting expert, to be able to do that. And I think that would be stunningly beautiful to be able to drive up Main Street, especially, and see that. So that's something you could put in your bag of tricks.
Yep, always have a plan. Yep.
Yeah, I think that would be. There's a church over in Cooperstown, I think, where James Fenimore Cooper. I think it's an Episcopalian church, and they backlight the windows during Christmas time, and it's stunning.
Yeah, it would be.
Yep.
That's a great project. In thinking about the future, I know you've got this audio tour, but after I spoke to Peggy a few days ago about this podcast, I hung up the phone. I got thinking, why not put this out there as like a bus tour destination where people could come in and view this church and learn about the windows, and because it's such a beauty.
I think this is Martin's original idea that he talked to me about, is having signs along the thruway or something like that, directing people to Little Falls.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's part of we have a second phase to this project. So I think that's part of the second phase, is that we have a marketing consultant that we work with, and she's wonderful. Her name is Haley Dubnoff. She's really, really good. And she has tons of ideas, whether we take those postcards and have them put at every thruway visitor center. She has a way of connecting us to certain blogs. And so I think she has a lot of really great ideas of how we can progress on the project.
Maybe the church could make a little bit of money on that.
I don't know, maybe. or bring more people back to church.
There you go. And that's another issue for another time to maybe talk about. But yeah, this is really interesting. And again, I thank you for coming in to talk about this. But before we wrap up, there is one thing, since Louis is sitting right here with us. I read your article that you recently published on Dave's website, and I have to tell you, it was terrific.
The one on nostalgia?
Called Nostalgia. And I love the way you started it, with the definition of nostalgia. But one of the things I took, and I know this is on a different topic, but you're sitting here, I can't help but say it. One of the things you said in there, you recommended to people that they sit with their grandparents or their parents. I'm one of the dumb ones. I didn't. My grandmother, my grandfather, all my grandparents obviously were immigrants, and I visited both of their hometowns in Italy with Mina, and it was absolutely phenomenal. But I never took the time as a young guy.
None of us, I don't. Very few.
Because I didn't become interested in the genealogy until later on. We have some of it. I have a cousin who hired a genealogist to help us with that, but it's so important, and I would recommend to people. You may not want to do it now, but do it.
Right.
I wish my grandmother was a wealth of knowledge in our family. She used to write in Italian to my grandfather's relatives in Mount St. Angelo, where he was born, and she just had all the detail. So when I went there, I had photos and stuff. My father, during World War II, met his grandfather in that town. Because before he left, he told his father, my grandfather, if I ever get to Mount St. Angelo, I'll look up Grandpa. And he did, and I have the photo. So when I went there, I'm walking around the streets with these photos, showing them to people. But anyway, I think it's really important. I thought that was a tremendous message.
I remember as a kid, maybe 10, 12 years old, to sit and talk to my grandfather, Marsak, who was from Slovenia. Mm-hmm. And he used to tell me as a young man about floating down the rivers, and how his boat ride across the Atlantic to join his older brother and eventually his whole family here, in one ear, out the other ear. I probably retained maybe 5% of what he told me.
Okay. Any relation to Charlie Marasak?
Is my mother's cousin.
Okay.
So we're related.
Okay. Yeah. I remember Charlie's cigar shop down on West Main Street.
I do too. Yeah. He lived up on Skinner Street above us there.
Yeah, that was iconic, along with all the other pool halls. And that's a whole other can of worms that we could open up. Anyway, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. I've learned a lot already, and I'm looking forward. I'm taking a tour, and I think Dave is too. On Sunday, and we're looking forward to going.
Thanks for having us.
I'm holding over, and I'm going to go too.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. And that's it for us today, and look forward to the next episode of The Inside View, when I'm going to have Mike Edwards, who is the Executive Director of the Herkimer County Land Bank. That will be an interesting discussion. Thank you for watching.